My name's Elise, I'm 36. I live in a modest flat above a bookstore I manage part-time. In a quiet part of Connecticut most people pass through on their way somewhere else. And honestly, that's always suited me just fine. I've never chased noise. Never needed flashing lights or crowds to feel like I mattered. I was the kind of child who sat with sketchbooks while the others played tag. The kind of teenager who spent prom night hand-stitching a hemline just because I wanted it to fall exactly right. My world has always been soft cotton textures, muted colors, careful edges. I was raised by working-class parents who valued practicality, and I inherited that rhythm without question. We didn't have much growing up, but I never felt deprived. At least, not until I learned what it meant to be dismissed. Not by strangers, but by people you're supposed to belong to. It started gradually. You don't realize you're invisible right away. It's something that settles in like dust, quiet, weightless at first. Then one day, you breathe it in and wonder when it became part of the air around you. For me, that shift began the year Vanessa married my brother. Vanessa is ... unforgettable, tall, commanding, with a wardrobe that could feed a small village and a tone that never quite softens, even when she's smiling. She's the kind of woman who walks into a room and makes sure you know she's arrived, not just because she looks immaculate, but because she expects your admiration. She didn't grow up like we did. Her family ran a luxury salon chain, and she used to drop names of designers like she'd personally had dinner with all of them. Maybe she had. I never checked at first. I was just amused by her. I chalked it up to cultural difference, but it didn't take long for her to make it clear I was beneath her radar and eventually beneath her regard. It wasn't that she was openly cruel. It was subtler than that. It was in how she'd glance at my outfit and say, "You're so brave to wear something like that." Or how she'd offer to take me shopping one day so I could learn to mix textures better. Once, at Christmas, she gave me a book on beginner fashion techniques. Everyone laughed. I laughed, too. But something inside me felt small. And I suppose that's the thing. With Vanessa, you never bleed out loud. You just bruise in places. No one sees. The rest of the family adored her. My mother clung to her every compliment like it was oxygen. My father started asking her for gift advice, even when it came to me. At birthdays, she'd bring designer bags with tags still dangling, while I showed up with homemade candles or a carefully sewn tote. They'd ooh and ah over hers. Mine, politely ignored. Still, I didn't mind, at least, not enough to change. I liked my quiet world. I had my books, my sketches, my weekly lunches with Mrs. Cordell from downstairs, who used to teach textiles before retirement and always told me my seams were cleaner than half the department stores. I didn't need applause. I needed peace. But everything shifted the night of the Eastbridge Gala. It was a benefit hosted by one of our store's biggest donors, a kind, older woman named Caroline, whose late husband had left a generous fund for literacy programs. I'd helped organize a children's reading room that year, and Caroline invited me as a guest. I remember how surprised I was to receive that envelope. I don't get many of those. I spent 3 weeks working on a dress. Midnight navy. High neckline, open back, hand-beaded sleeves. It was simple, elegant. Mine. Every thread stitched with care. I didn't tell anyone about it, not because I was ashamed, but because I knew how it would be received. I wanted the night to be quiet. I wanted to stand in a room and not feel erased. Of course, Vanessa was there. She wasn't even invited directly, but she came as someone's plus one. I should have known. That night meant everything to her kind of people. Appearances, lenses, prestige. She wore silver sequins and Louboutin heels that probably cost more than my rent. I remember how she stopped mid-step when she saw me across the floor. She looked me up and down, then smiled, slow, condescending. Familiar. And then, in a voice just loud enough for the people around us to hear, she said, "Looks like someone got creative with the curtains." They laughed. Not all of them, but enough. I didn't say anything. I just smiled, nodded slightly, and excused myself. I left before dessert, but I didn't forget. and the next morning, as I folded the dress and placed it back into its box, something settled in my chest. Not anger, not spite, just clarity. I hadn't been invisible all those years. They'd seen me. They'd just decided I didn't matter. And somehow, that hurt more. I didn't expect to become the family's afterthought, but somehow, over the years, that's what I became. Vanessa had a way of making sure every conversation, every gathering, every flicker of attention eventually pointed back to her. And the strange thing is, it worked. Not because she was kind or thoughtful or wise, but because she dazzled, loudly, relentlessly, and unapologetically. I met her for the first time at my brother Marcus's engagement dinner. She wore red satin and diamond earrings that caught the light every time she moved her head. I still remember my mom whispering to my aunt that she looked just like someone off a magazine cover. I was happy for Marcus, or at least I told myself I was, but it didn't take long before that night set the tone for what was to come. Vanessa had a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. When she hugged me hello, she glanced down at my handmade wrap and said, "Oh, you're one of those artistic types, right? That's so quaint." I don't remember what I said in return. Probably nothing. I'd learned a long time ago that not everything deserves a reaction, but Vanessa wasn't just fashionable, she was strategic. She'd married up before, divorced a finance executive in her late 20s, collected a settlement that made her more comfortable than she liked to admit, and learned to treat social situations like auditions for a role she thought she deserved. At family gatherings, she played the part of the perfect daughter-in-law. She complimented my mom's cooking in a voice just loud enough to be heard by everyone. She called my dad sir, even after he told her not to. And she brought gifts. Always something wrapped in ribbons, with brand tags still visible, handbags, candles from luxury spas, gourmet chocolates flown in from somewhere unnecessary. Meanwhile, I'd show up with homemade sourdough, or hand-knit scarves, or flower arrangements from my neighbor's garden. No one ever said I was less than, but no one ever said much about me at all. There's a particular kind of silence that settles when someone you love starts looking through you. I used to think being ignored was better than being mocked. But with Vanessa, I started to realize they often go hand in hand. She didn't insult me outright, not really. She did something worse. She minimized. She once told me, at a cousin's wedding, that I had a nice little minimalist thing going on after glancing at the dress I'd designed. Then she told the group she almost wore the same shade, like she'd discovered me imitating her, not the other way around. And the way everyone nodded, even smiled, like I should be flattered. That stung. Marcus didn't step in. Not once. I don't think he even noticed. He was busy trying to keep up with Vanessa's orbit, trying to prove that he was enough for her. I used to be close with him, but slowly, steadily, that faded to it. Was like being part of a conversation that kept moving just out of reach. My mother would ask Vanessa for skincare tips and ignore me when I brought her favorite tea. My father joked that I was the practical one, always said with affection, but always followed by a sigh. As if practicality were a burden they'd resigned themselves to. Vanessa was all sparkle and curated elegance. Her Instagram showed private tasting menus, gallery openings, and spas in Santorini. Meanwhile, my life was slow and stitched together by routine coffee in the morning, design clients in the afternoons, quiet evenings, with books or thread. I never wanted her life, that's the thing. I didn't want to be her, but I did want to be seen. I remember a particular moment, the kind that doesn't seem important to anyone else, but lodges itself in your memory. It was my birthday. I turned 35. Vanessa arrived late to the family dinner, breezing in with a sleek white gift bag and a story about running into a celebrity at the airport. Everyone leaned in. She handed my mother a gift just because. And it was a designer silk scarf, one she said would match Mom's new coat. When it came time for my gift, she slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a $25 gift card to a coffee shop chain. No note. No words. Later that night, I found the receipt tucked behind the card. She'd used her rewards points. I stared at that slip of paper for a long time. Not because of the money. It wasn't that, it was the thoughtlessness, the message between the lines. You don't matter enough to remember. And that's when I realized something. Vanessa didn't just want to be admired. She wanted to be the only one admired, and the family. They handed her the spotlight gladly, because it was easier to orbit someone bright than to examine what they'd ignored in the shadows. But the thing about being in the shadows, you learn how to see in the dark. And that quiet, slow seeing, the kind no one thinks you're capable of, that's where something starts to grow. Something deeper than envy. A quiet resolve. Something they'll never see coming. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing. That's the thing. I didn't wake up one day and realize I was the outsider in my own family. It happened slowly, in ways that almost felt too small to matter. A shift in tone. A glance held a second too long. Laughter that didn't include me, not cruel. Exactly, just ... forgetful. At first, I brushed it off. People change. Priorities shift. But it's something else entirely when those changes revolve around who brings what to the table, or, more often, what brand it's wrapped in. Vanessa had a way of turning everything into a statement, not just about herself, but about everyone around her. And it wasn't always what she said. It was what others started repeating after her. It was little things. My mother, commenting on how well put together Vanessa always looked, right after, asking me if I wanted her to pick me up a real jacket while she was at the mall, or my father, telling me I should ask Vanessa for advice on looking more professional when I showed up to dinner in a blazer I'd tailored myself. He said it like a compliment. He didn't mean anything by it, but still. Even Marcus, who used to be proud of my designs, started asking if I ever thought about working for a real fashion house. As if my work only mattered if someone with a bigger name stamped approval on it. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. I didn't want the life Vanessa had, but I did want to be valued, not for how loud I could be, or what I wore, or who I was standing next to, just for who I was. Apparently, that wasn't enough anymore. At family gatherings, Vanessa held court. Her handbags had stories. Her shoes had wait lists. Her jewelry, we were reminded, came from a boutique in Milan. You wouldn't know it. Once, she joked that I was her little project, that with enough time, she'd get me to ditch the linen phase. My aunt laughed. So did my mom. I laughed too, because what else could I do? But something cracked a little deeper inside that day. I'd grown up thinking love looked like showing up, like remembering birthdays, cooking someone's favorite dish, fixing a hem without being asked. But now, it seemed like love was measured in price tags and perceived status, and the higher the number, the warmer the reception. That shift seeped into everything. At holidays, gifts became me a competition. Vanessa's, extravagant sleek wrapping, luxury logos, items no one needed but everyone gushed over. I stayed simple, thoughtful, personal, things made by hand or chosen with meaning. But over time, even the people who used to value that, stopped noticing. My cousin once opened a hand-stitched bag I'd made her, soft brown leather, lined with her favorite shade of blue, and said, "Oh, ... you made this. That's nice," before tossing it aside to unwrap a perfume Vanessa had brought from Paris. My grandmother was the only one who really saw me during those moments. She'd pat my hand under the table or raise an eyebrow when someone said something dismissive. She didn't speak up often, but her presence grounded me. She used to say, "There's a difference between being overlooked and being underestimated. One just hurts. The other can work in your favor." I didn't fully understand what she meant back then. I do now, because the more they dismissed me, the more space they gave me to move unnoticed. There was a moment that stays with me, not because it was dramatic, but because it was so casual it cut deeper. It was a Sunday lunch, just the immediate family. Vanessa had brought a new bracelet, gold, chunky, and loud in every sense of the word. She set it down next to her wine glass on purpose, just to make sure everyone saw it. My mom picked it up and said, "Oh my, this must have cost a fortune." Vanessa shrugged and said, "It's nothing, just a little something to treat myself. You know how it is." Then, without missing a beat, she turned to me and asked, "So, Elise, what's the last thing you treated yourself to?" There was no warmth in it. Just that same smile. I looked down at my hands, still faintly stained from natural dye I'd been using the day before. "I bought some wool," I said. "A really beautiful skein from a local artist. I'm making a piece for the bookstore." Vanessa blinked, then laughed. "Oh," she said. "Still in your Little Women era. That's adorable." The table chuckled. I kept my face steady. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just took another bite of food and focused on the quiet voice in my head that whispered, "They're not laughing at your wool. They're laughing because they think you'll always stay small." But what they didn't see, what none of them ever saw, was that the hands they underestimated, those same hands had been quietly building something stronger than anything they'd ever understand. Something woven with intention, and I'd stopped needing their approval long before I stopped wanting it. The invitation came folded in, cream-colored, cardstock tucked between a stack of donor thank you letters and publisher catalogs. I almost missed it. I hadn't even known our bookstore was being recognized. But Caroline, one of our longtime patrons, had nominated us for a local literacy impact award. I'd overseen a program last spring pairing low-income students with design-themed reading journals. It wasn't flashy work, but it meant something. And apparently, someone noticed. Inside the envelope was a formal invitation to the Eastbridge Foundation's annual gala. Dress code, formal. Location, the City Museum. Date, 3 weeks from that Friday. I held the card for a long time, reading the embossed letters over and over. Not because I didn't believe them, but because I wanted to memorize how it felt. To be invited not because of who I was connected to, but because of something I'd built. It was small, maybe, in the grand scheme of things, but it was mine. I didn't tell my family right away. I wasn't trying to hide it. I just wanted a few days to keep it to myself, to let the quiet joy settle before the noise of opinions took over. And once I finally did mention it during Sunday lunch, no one really reacted. Marcus blinked. "Huh, fancy," he said, mouth half-full. Vanessa asked, "Is it one of those events where people bring their own food, or are there servers?" She was smiling when she said it, but it was the kind of smile that made everything feel like a joke. "Especially to me." My mother asked if I needed help finding something appropriate to wear. I nodded and said I'd figure it out. What I didn't say was that I already had. The moment I opened that envelope, I knew I wanted to wear something of my own. Not just something I liked, something I made. Not to prove a point, not to impress anyone, just to reclaim the feeling of showing up in a room as me. So for the next 3 weeks, I carved out late evenings after work, lit a candle on the kitchen counter, and began to stitch. I chose a shade of blue, deep and calm, almost black in dim light, but soft and shimmering when it caught warmth. I used fabric I'd been saving, unsure why, until now. I lined it with silk I'd bartered 4 months earlier, hand-stitched every seam. It wasn't trendy. It wasn't something you'd find on a runway. But it was graceful, intentional, whole. I felt proud of it, until I saw her. I didn't know Vanessa would be at the gala. She hadn't mentioned anything, but she arrived an hour into the evening, draped in silver, a gown that clung and sparkled like it had been sewn from diamonds. The kind of piece designed to blind people into applause. Her voice reached me. Before her eyes did, she was telling someone nearby about a trip to Milan, laughing at the idea of American boutiques trying too hard. Then she turned, saw me. She took a few steps closer, her heels clicking like punctuation, and with a glance down at my gown, she smiled and said, "Looks like someone got creative with the curtains." It wasn't what she said that hurt. It was how easily everyone around us laughed. People I'd never met, professionals, donors, organizers, chuckled politely, eyes flicking from my dress to hers like we were some kind of side-by-side exhibit. I didn't say anything. I just smiled softly, nodded once, and excused myself. It wasn't shame that filled me as I stepped away. It was something heavier, something quieter, disappointment. Not in Vanessa, I'd long since stopped expecting kindness from her, but in myself. For forgetting how easily rooms could be taken from you the moment someone louder walks in. And for thinking, just for a second, that maybe I'd earned a space at that table. Back home, I folded the gown gently. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat on the edge of my bed and ran my fingers over the hem. All that work. All that care. And somehow, one sentence from Vanessa made me feel 10 years old again, like the girl who brought hand-sewn bookmarks to the school gift exchange and watched the other kids trade them for candy. But the thing about quiet pain, it doesn't go away. It waits, and sometimes, it grows into something sharper, something with edges, not for revenge, not yet, but for clarity. And that night, for the first time in years, I saw things for exactly what they were, without nostalgia, without longing, without trying to fix it. They didn't just undervalue what I made. They needed me to stay small so they could keep feeling big. And once I realized that, I stopped shrinking. I didn't make it to desert. I told the host I wasn't feeling well, which, in a way, was true, and left before the room dimmed for the awards ceremony. My dress felt heavier with every step, like the seams were lined with shame, and still, I carried it. Not because I was proud in that moment, but because I didn't want to leave a part of myself behind in a place where I had never truly been invited to begin with. The city outside felt colder than I remembered. That night, in the quiet of my apartment, I sat on the edge of my bed and unpinned each part of myself Vanessa had tried to reduce. I didn't cry. I rarely do. It's not about strength. It's not about strength. Sometimes you just reach a point where tears feel like a luxury you don't owe anyone. Instead, I hung the gown up and stood in front of it. It was beautiful. I knew that. I knew every stitch, every decision, the dart at the waist, the pleats at the shoulder, the way the fabric moved like water when I turned. I had made something graceful, something elegant, something mine, and yet, all it took was one sentence to make me feel like a child playing dress-up. Looks like someone glued scraps together and called it couture. Her words played on a loop in my mind. Not loud, but constant. Like a song I never wanted to hear again. I wondered if she rehearsed it, or if cruelty just came that easily to her. But what stayed with me more than the words themselves was how many people laughed, how many nodded, shifted their eyes away, or stayed silent. That was the part I couldn't forget. It's strange how a moment like that makes everything before it look different in hindsight. I thought back to every family gathering where my mother had complimented Vanessa's outfits and ignored mine, to the Christmas where I gifted hand-stitched aprons, and everyone left them in their gift bags while they passed around the wine Vanessa brought from Napa, to the wedding where she'd worn white by accident, and no one said a word, not even the bride. For years, I told myself they didn't mean to hurt me, that I was being sensitive, that I needed to be more confident. But in that moment, I stopped making excuses for them. It wasn't that they didn't see my worth. It was that they were never taught how to measure it. They didn't know how to value something that wasn't branded, loud, or already validated by someone else. And I had spent so long trying to shrink myself into something palatable, hoping one day they'd realize I was worth their attention, their admiration, even. But that night, I saw the truth for what it was. I had been dressing for their eyes, designing in hopes of being recognized, and maybe that's why her words cut so deeply. Not because I believed them, but because, until then, some small part of me had still believed they might one day believe in me. That part broke, quietly, cleanly, and, in the stillness that followed, something else began to form. Not revenge, not yet, but resolve. They could keep their brands and their borrowed prestige, their curated performances, their applause for people who played by the rules written by wealth and insecurity. I didn't need to be accepted by people who couldn't see beyond a label. I wanted something real, something that would last beyond a dinner party, something that didn't rely on being louder than the next person in the room. It wasn't about proving Vanessa wrong. It was about finally proving myself right. And maybe, for the first time in years, I started to believe I could not by becoming her, but by becoming more of who I was, with no apologies, no explanations. No shrinking. The dress hung in my room for weeks. I didn't pack it away. I didn't sell it. I let it hang not as a reminder of the insult, but as proof that I had created something beautiful. And if someone like Vanessa couldn't see that, it said more about her vision than my work. Maybe that was the shift. Maybe that's where everything quietly began. By the next weekend I'd managed to tuck the gala behind me, not forget it, that wasn't possible, but shelve it somewhere quieter in my mind. I thought maybe I could move on without needing to revisit the sting of it again. But then came Sunday brunch. It was tradition in our family. The kind that sounds warm when you say it aloud, but in practice had started to feel more like an obligation than a connection. Still, I showed up. I always did. Everyone was already seated by the time I arrived. Plates clinked, voices overlapped, and Vanessa was holding court, as usual, one hand wrapped around a mimosa, the other gesturing with theatrical flair. I didn't have to hear the setup to know where the story was going. She was halfway through recounting the gala. Not the event itself, not the charity, or the award, or any of the literacy work that brought us there, but her favorite part, the moment she humiliated me. She didn't say my name right away. She didn't have to. So there I am, in silver, not just wearing it, but owning it. When I spot this thing, laughter. It looked like a craft project got tangled in a windstorm. Bless her heart, she called it couture. More laughter, louder this time. And then, I told her it looked like someone glued scraps together and prayed for the best. That line, again. I didn't move, I didn't speak, I just listened. And then, just to twist the knife, she added, but you know, Elise, she's sweet, always trying so hard to be creative, sweet. It was the kind of word people use when they want to insult you without sounding unkind. I scanned the table. My father was smiling faintly into his coffee. My mother gave a soft laugh, the kind that sounded more like habit than cruelty. Marcus didn't look up. No one said anything. No one stopped her, and in that moment, something in me broke. But not in the way it had at the gala. This wasn't embarrassing. It wasn't even hurt. It was detachment, like watching the final piece of a puzzle slide into place, and realizing the picture it formed had nothing to do with you. They didn't just laugh at me, they let her laugh at me. And they stayed quiet because her voice had more value in that room than my silence ever had. I placed my napkin on my plate and stood. I didn't make a scene. I didn't throw words or walk out dramatically. I simply said I wasn't feeling well and left. No one stopped me. On the way home, I didn't cry. I didn't call a friend. I didn't try to unpack it like I used to, searching for a softer angle. Trying to give people the benefit of the doubt. There was no doubt left. What they saw when they looked at me wasn't someone who belonged, it was someone they tolerated, quietly, easily, forgettably, and that realization settled in a place deeper than resentment. It settled into resolve, because being mocked at a gala hurt, but being dismissed at your own family's table, that hollowed something out. I thought about every stitch in that gown. Every quiet hour I'd spent building something beautiful from scratch. Not for them, but for myself. And then I thought about how easily they tossed it aside, like it wasn't worth even a second of defense. That's when it happened. That shift, something inside me stopped hoping, not just for their praise, but for their recognition, and strangely, it felt freeing, because once you stop waiting to be seen, you can finally start building something without apology, without hesitation, without explaining your worth, before someone decides whether or not to believe it. They had written their version of me long ago, and I had spent too long trying to edit it from the margins. Not anymore. I wouldn't rewrite myself to fit into their story. I was going to write something entirely new, and I wasn't going to ask anyone to read it. That week, the silence didn't sting the way it used to. I didn't replay conversations in my head. I didn't try to Imagine softer versions of what had been said, or left unsaid. I didn't reach for the phone to check if anyone had followed up after I left the brunch early. They hadn't, and that, somehow, was the clearest answer I could have asked for. I spent the following days avoiding anything loud. No music, no TV, just stillness. Letting the noise fall away until I could hear myself again. It had been so long since I'd truly sat with my own thoughts, without trying to reshape them for someone else's approval, and what I found there, beneath the ache and the old habits, was something steady. A pulse. Faint at first, but persistent. Design had always been my quiet refuge. Before the comparisons, before the comments, before Vanessa's voice filled every corner of my family's conversations, it had been mine, a place I could go to breathe. And somewhere along the way, I'd let their opinions build a fence around it. As if creativity only counted when it came with a price tag and a showroom. That night, I opened the drawer I hadn't touched in months. Inside was a stack of sketchbooks, worn at the edges. Filled with half-formed ideas, fragments of gowns, details of collars. Silhouettes I'd drawn between grocery lists and errands. I turned the pages slowly, running my hand over lines that still felt alive. There was something sacred about seeing my thoughts in ink. Not perfect, but real. I cleared off the kitchen table, pulled my fabric bins from the back of the closet, and began again. Not because I had something to prove, but because I had something to remember. The rhythm came back faster than I expected. Like muscle memory. My hands moved with purpose. My breath found a new tempo. Late nights turned into early mornings. I lost track of time in the best way. I started small, a jacket from reclaimed wool. A linen wrap dress with hidden pockets. A tunic that draped just the way I'd pictured months ago but hadn't had the nerve to start. No audience. No applause. Just the quiet hum of reclaiming something I never should have given up. And that's when the idea came. Not in a flash, but gradually, like something waiting for me to slow down long enough to notice it. I remembered an article I'd read a while back, tucked between 2 pages of a fashion trade magazine at the bookstore. It had mentioned a local incubator program, one designed to support early stage designers with limited resources but strong vision. I'd skipped past it at the time, assuming it wasn't meant for people like me. But now, I wasn't so sure. I pulled it up that night. The deadline was in 3 weeks. The requirements were simple. A portfolio, a written proposal, and a short personal statement about the mission behind your designs. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the screen. And then, I started writing. Not a polished pitch, not a brand statement. Just the truth. I wrote about slow fashion, about sustainability, about designing for real women, not just runway models, or influencers, but women honed to feel beautiful without asking permission. I wrote about texture and memory and the way fabric can hold stories, just as tightly as words. And when I hit submit, I didn't feel nervous. I felt aligned. I wasn't trying to win anything. I wasn't chasing prestige. I just wanted to step fully into the thing I'd always loved, and see what would happen if I stopped holding myself back. For the first time, I was building not from pain, but from presence, not to be noticed, but to be whole. And beneath that, humming low and quiet, was something else, something sharper. Not rage, not revenge, exactly, but something close, a seed, because somewhere deep down, I knew, if this path led where I thought it might, Vanessa would see my work again. Only next time. It wouldn't be a dress I wore, it would be a name she recognized, but never expected to be mine. I was still threading an idol to fabric the night I got the email. It was from the incubator program. Short and direct, but kind. I'd been accepted. I stared at the screen for a while, just letting the words settle. There was no confetti, no fanfare, just okayed acknowledgement. But it was enough. More than enough, because someone had read my application and said yes. Not because of who I knew. Not because I had connections or a shiny resume. Just because of the work. And that yes unlocked more than just a door. It opened a part of me I hadn't touched in years. The first few weeks in the program were overwhelming in the best way. There were workshops on sustainable sourcing, mock pitch sessions, and panels with boutique owners and ethical manufacturers, and then there was Inez. She wasn't someone you could miss. Not because she was flashy, quite the opposite, but because she held herself like someone who had nothing left to prove. Inez had worked in fashion long before it became synonymous with clout and chaos. Her designs had graced major runways in the 90s, and her name still carried quiet weight in the right circles. But she didn't lead with that, she spoke plainly. She wore worn leather boots and linen jackets and always had graphite on her fingers, from sketching on napkins. The first time we spoke one-on-one, she asked to see my work. Not my pitch, not my concept deck, just my work. So I brought in a few pieces. She didn't say much at first, just ran her hands over the seams, studied the weight of the fabrics, and traced a few stitches with her thumb. Then she looked up and said, "You know what you're doing." It was simple, but it landed deeper than any compliment I'd ever received, because it wasn't flattery. It wasn't approval dressed in politeness. It was recognition. She saw it, and from that moment on, she never let me play small. When I doubted a design, she'd say, "What's it trying to say?" Not, "What will sell?" or "What's trending?" When I hesitated over pricing something fairly, she reminded me, "You're not charging for fabric. You're charging for vision. Don't apologize for knowing what it's worth." She taught me to source with intention, not just cheap or ethical, but aligned, fabric that felt like the story I wanted to tell. And more than anything, she helped me understand what branding really was. Not logos, not colors, but identity. "People don't buy clothes," she said once. "They buy how they want to feel." In the world, you're not making fashion. You're giving someone a moment to feel like they belong in their own skin. No one had ever put it that way before. We'd sit in the back of the studio space, late into the evenings, her scribbling edits into the margins of my sketches, me listening and learning without feeling small. She didn't coddle, but she believed in me without hesitation. And somewhere in that space between pattern paper and chai tea and long, quiet nods, something began to shift again. I began to believe in myself the same way. Not in the performative way I'd practiced for years, standing tall on the outside while folding in on the inside, but fully. I started reworking some of my older designs, breathing new life into pieces I had once abandoned too early. Inez pushed me to strip away what I thought people wanted and return to what I wanted the clothes to feel like. I found a new kind of rhythm, a deeper one. And one evening, as we were packing up after a critique session, Inez paused and said, "Have you ever thought about licensing a line under a separate name?" I looked at her, confused. "You mean hiding behind a label?" She shook her head. "No. I mean building one strong enough to stand on its own. Let the name rise first. Let people fall in love with the work before they attach it to a person." I hadn't thought of that, but it stayed with me, because as proud as I was of the work I was doing, there was still that voice in the back of my mind. The one that remembered Vanessa's laughter, my mother's silence, the way they'd looked through me like I was furniture, and something about the idea of building something so good they couldn't ignore it without knowing it was me, felt right. Like taking back the pen. I didn't want revenge for its own sake, but I did want the freedom to move without their shadow hanging over me. And if Inez saw that potential, if she thought I could build something real, then maybe it was time to stop waiting for permission. Because the woman they dismissed over brunch, she was long gone, and in her place was someone quietly, carefully building something they'd one day recognize. Far too late. Inez always said the first real win wouldn't come with noise. "It'll be small," she told me once, folding the corner of a sketch, "but it'll echo longer than you think." I didn't know what she meant then, not fully, but I felt it weeks later, standing in the back of a small boutique in Eastbridge, watching a stranger run her fingers across a blouse I'd stitched in silence. It wasn't a flagship, just a thoughtful little store tucked between a florist and an antique map shop. They carried ethical brands, handmade goods, pieces that weren't trying to shout. Exactly the kind of place that didn't care if you had 10,000 followers or a billboard. They just wanted the work, to be honest. When they agreed to carry 6 of my pieces under the label I'd quietly created, I didn't tell anyone. Not even Inez right away. I wanted to hold it close for a bit, to feel what it meant without the weight of expectation or opinion. I called the line, Dove Grey. Soft, unassuming, but deliberate. The tag read simply, designed with intention, worn with ease. No name, no story, just the work. And somehow, that anonymity felt like armor. The first week, a tunic, then 2 dresses, then a wrap coat I'd almost pulled from the rack at the last minute because I wasn't sure it deserved to be there. The boutique owner forwarded reviews, quiet little notes left by buyers. Feels like it was made for me. Finally, something that fits like it understands me. Simplicity I can breathe in. I read them at night with tea and a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't fame, but it had an impact, and for someone who had spent so long being talked over, those quiet words felt louder than anything Vanessa had ever bragged about. Inez beamed when I finally told her. She didn't gush. That wasn't her way, but she touched my wrist and said, "Now it's real." We started planning a capsule collection, just 10 pieces. Enough to explore more structure. Play with contrast. Something bolder but still me. And it was around that time that a friend from the incubator texted me a link. Nothing urgent, just a fashion blog she followed. "Thought you'd like this," she wrote. "They reviewed a piece from your shop. Guess which one?" I clicked. It was a mid-tier blog, known for its clean layout and loyal readers. Not viral, but respected. There, nestled between reviews of overpriced runway collections and interviews with newer indie brands, was a glowing spotlight on Dove Grey's wrap coat, an understated triumph. The writer called it, "like wearing calm." The seams speak louder than the label. I blinked a few times, then scrolled to the bottom where the comments had started to appear. Most were from readers complimenting the cut, the simplicity, and asking about shipping. And then I saw her, or rather, her name, Vanessa. Commenting under her influencer handle. "Obsessed with this silhouette. Bought it last week. So clean and chic." Finally, a brand that understands elegance without screaming for attention. I stared at the words for a while, not because I needed her validation. I didn't, but because of the irony. She was praising the very thing she once mocked. She'd worn one of my pieces, bought it, loved it, bragged about it, without ever knowing who made it. It wasn't just a full circle. It was a quiet revolution. She didn't know my name, didn't know she'd spent real money to wear the work of the woman she once called a thrift store romantic. And I didn't feel spiteful. I felt still, because I didn't need to tell her. That comment, glowing, unaware, eager to align herself with something she once laughed at, was louder than any confrontation. I could have had. It meant I'd already shifted the narrative. Without asking, without proving. I just did the work, and eventually the work walked right past her ego and into her closet. That night, I sat with Inez and showed her the blog. She chuckled and saw a short satisfied and shook her head. "Careful," she said, smiling into her cup. "You're becoming dangerous in the best way." I didn't reply. Just let that settle in my chest. Because for once, I knew it was true. I knew it was true. She'd bowed to it without even knowing. And the best part, I hadn't raised my voice. I'd raised the bar. I didn't expect it to catch on like it did. But word of mouth has its own rhythm, especially in the kinds of circles Vanessa moved in, the ones that only embraced something once it was considered exclusive, obscure, and just hard enough to access. The boutique orders increased. More stores reached out. A second blog picked it up, then a third. And still, I kept my name out of it. Dove Grey wasn't about me, not visibly. That had been the point. Inez helped me navigate the details, inventory, timelines, legal protections. We worked late into the evenings discussing supply chain issues and pricing tiers. But underneath it all, there was a quiet thrill building. Because one afternoon, over coffee with a friend from the incubator, I got a text with a photo attached. It was a brunch table. croissants, espresso cups, and a familiar coat draped casually over the back of a chair, Vanessa's chair. She was wearing one of my pieces. Again, the caption read, "Vanessa's obsessed with that brand, Dove Gris lately, says it's the only real fashion left." I sat there, staring at the screen. The edge of my cup pressed gently to my lips. There was something almost poetic about it. All those years she spent dismissing me, mocking anything that didn't carry a recognizable label, and now here she was, proudly attaching her identity to something I built in silence. I didn't respond to the text. I just smiled a little and let the moment stretch from there. It snowballed. I began seeing photos of her online, posted by others, mirror selfies, brunch snapshots, event recaps, always tagged with Dove Gray. She had no idea, no clue that the designer behind the line she now draped herself in was the same woman she once called a walking craft project, and I said nothing. That silence was deliberate, because I didn't want credit. I wanted distance. I wanted to watch her fall in love with the very thing she once mocked, without knowing it came from the same hands she tried so hard to belittle. She started bringing it up at family gatherings, complimenting the brand, telling my mother she should try something elevated for once, and suggesting a Dove Gris wrap dress. My mother nodded and said she'd think about it. No one asked my opinion, and I didn't offer one. I just listened, softly, letting their praise of this mysterious new label wash over me like the softest form of justice, because for once, they valued something without knowing it came from me, which meant their approval had no strings, no pity, no precondition. They were seeing the work without the filter of their bias. And that in itself was healing. Around that time, a quiet opportunity presented itself. A mid-size brand owner, a woman named Claire, who'd built her boutique label over the course of 15 years, was looking to retire. We'd met once at a panel hosted by the incubator, and she remembered my pitch. She reached out directly, said she liked my ethic, trusted my eye. She wanted her legacy carried on by someone who respected craftsmanship, not just profit. We talked numbers, vision, future integration, and somewhere in that conversation, the seed of something even larger began to take shape. This was no longer just about revenge. It was about roots, expansion, permanence. I didn't want Dove Gris to be a trend. I wanted it to be a foundation. And Claire's offer, it was the start of something lasting. We began negotiating the terms of acquisition. Slowly, quietly, thoroughly, Inez reviewed every contract, every clause, and the more we built, the more I realized I wasn't just reclaiming space anymore. I was creating new ones, places where women like me, thoughtful, deliberate, steady, could exist without shrinking. Vanessa still wore Dove Gris every chance she got. Once, she called it effortless sophistication while turning her wrist to show off a blouse she had no idea I'd drafted in my kitchen. And I nodded, smiled politely, let her have her moment. Because soon enough, those pieces would no longer just be part of a trend. They'd belong to a legacy she could never touch. And when the reveal came, when my name eventually, inevitably, surfaced, she wouldn't just be embarrassed. She'd be irrelevant, because the story wouldn't be about her. It would be about a woman she never saw coming. A woman she'd already worn, praised and paraded. Without ever knowing, she was giving me the spotlight, one brunch at a time, and the best part, I hadn't said a single word. I never thought I'd own a brand before I turned 40. But some opportunities don't ask if you're ready. They show up like a door that was always meant to open, quietly waiting for you to find the right key. Claire's offer came with trust, and Inez's guidance came with clarity. But the final piece, the one that made the acquisition possible, arrived through someone I hadn't expected. His name was Theo, a former textile buyer I'd met once during the incubator's winter networking event. He had a sharp eye, the kind that could spot quality before you even unfolded the garment. But more than that, he believed in founders who still touched their work with their own hands. When I told him about Claire's boutique line, its following, its margins, its soul, he didn't hesitate. We drew up the proposal in a matter of weeks, clean, confidential. Strategic. Claire insisted on keeping the transition quiet, which suited me perfectly. I didn't want a press release or a profile. I just wanted to protect what she'd built and quietly tuck it into something bigger. Something that would eventually live under the Devigry umbrella. Vanessa, of course, remained unaware, still obsessed, still styling the pieces like she was curating a museum. At one family dinner, one of the rare ones I still attended out of obligation more than tradition, she arrived late. As always, she wore a soft charcoal trench from Claire's old label. One I had just approved for restock. My signature now lived in its hem. Literally, she turned to my mother, hand fluttering near her lapel, and said, "This piece, honestly, I'd sell a kidney if they ever stopped making this line. I don't care what it costs. Real style doesn't ask permission." My mother chuckled softly. "You do love that brand," she said. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Vanessa had no idea I now signed every purchase order she so breathlessly anticipated. No idea that I now held the rights, the trademarks, the decisions behind her so-called Holy Grail wardrobe. It was never about control. It wasn't even about her. It was about making peace with the fact that she no longer held any power over me. Not her words, not her presence, not even her praise. Because when someone spends years trying to make you feel small, the most radical thing you can do is grow so quietly they don't even notice they're standing in your shadow. Inez and Ias finalized the rebranding schedule a week later. Slow transitions, no abrupt changes. A subtle merger. Claire's line would still breathe with its original style, but over time, pieces would carry Devigry's deeper ethos. Simple touches, a different thread in the lining. Slight shifts, in cut, sustainabilityists into every seam, and my name. Still nowhere near the tags. That was intentional. I didn't need credit in the way I used to crave it. That hunger had passed. What I wanted now was permanence, impact, freedom. To create without being filtered through their old version of me. The version they once overlooked. The next release came 3 weeks after the acquisition. A capsule of soft structured outerwear, clean lines, neutral tones. Garments designed to feel like armor and invitation at the same time. Theo handled the distribution. Inez reviewed the samples twice, then a third time, just because she could never resist checking the stitching. And me, I sat with the final approval folder in my lap, pen hovering over the sign-off line. It wasn't hesitation, it was reverence, because I had spent so many years stitching pieces together alone in a quiet kitchen, doubting whether the seams would hold in my work, in myself, and now, here I was, signing off on a line that would ship across the country. Worn by women who didn't know my story, but would feel it in every sleeve and hem. I signed my name softly. And in that moment, I felt it, not pride, exactly, but presence. Not a roar. A breath. The kind that comes after you've held one in far too long. Later that evening, I checked social media out of curiosity. Scrolling through the tags. There she was again. Vanessa, this time in the new release caption. "Whoever is behind this brand, please take a bow. I'm obsessed." I didn't screenshot it. I didn't share it. I just closed the app and exhaled, because that was the thing. She already had, and I had already left the stage. It had been exactly 1 year, same city, same month, same gala, but this time, my name wasn't on a folded invitation, hidden between errands. It was on the program. In print, honoring Elise, founder and creative director of Devigry, for her quiet revolution in sustainable fashion. That word quiet followed me everywhere now. It had started as a reflection of how I move through the world. How I built things slowly, on my own terms. But somewhere along the way, it became something else entirely. A signature. The Gala's theme was independent women in design, and the organizers had asked me to not only attend, Butyl Soup in the event. Not with a speech. Not with fanfare, but with a collection, debut, 12 pieces, curated, minimalist, intentional. Inez had insisted I be there in person. Even though the idea of walking through a room filled with faces that once looked through me still made my stomach tighten. But, this time, I wasn't walking in hoping to be seen. I was walking in knowing exactly who I was. I wore a structured dove gray wrap, one of my newer designs. Crisp lines, soft neckline, a hand-finished hem that took nearly 4 hours to get right. It felt like me. Fully. Theo and Inez met me at the entrance. She adjusted my sleeve with the same care she'd given my sketches for months. "Stay still," she said. "You're about to make history without making a sound." Inside, everything shimmered the way galas do: polished glassware, curated lighting, conversations that tried too hard, but I didn't shrink this time. I stood tall in my corner of the room, watching the world move, knowing it was about to shift in a way none of them expected. Vanessa arrived halfway through the cocktail hour. I knew she would be there. She never missed a social event with cameras. She wore a silk floor-length number from the new Dovegri capsule, the very piece she'd claimed she would sell a kidney for. I watched her glide in, head-high heels pointed like punctuation, and I felt nothing. Not nervous, not angry, just aware, like watching a play from backstage, knowing the final act had already been written. She didn't notice me at first. Why would she? I wasn't framed by anyone famous. I wasn't holding court. I was just standing there, calm, steady, wearing a name she still didn't know belonged to me. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, stopping for selfies, complimenting champagne, adjusting her dress so the tag Dovegri would be visible when the photographers snapped their shots. Inez leaned over and whispered, "You ready?" I nodded once. The lights dimmed. The MC took the stage and spoke about the night's theme: legacy, innovation, women who built without being handed anything. Then she said the words I hadn't let myself imagine for so long. "Please welcome our featured designer and guest of honor, Elise Marin, the mind behind Dovegri." There was a pause, a murmur, then polite applause. I stepped forward. I didn't look at Vanessa. Not yet. I simply walked to the center of the space as the collection was revealed behind me, one mannequin at a time, each piece illuminated like a quiet breath held just long enough to be noticed. Soft gasp. Applause, building, flashbulbs, then a voice, sharpened by shock. "Wait, Elise." "Vanessa." I turned slowly. Our eyes met. She looked at me, then at the dress she was wearing, then back at the mannequins. You could see the realization move through her. Not fast, but complete. Her lips parted, then closed again. I didn't flinch. I just smiled. A soft, knowing smile. The kind you save for the moment after the apology you'll never receive. She took a half step back, and in that moment, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not jealousy, confusion. Because for someone like Vanessa, status is power. And she had just realized she'd been propping herself up with mine, wearing my story, without ever recognizing the thread that held it together. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I let the applause fill the room, not because I needed it, but because I had earned it. Every stitch, every silence, every moment I was underestimated. They all led here, and for once, the loudest thing in the room was something I'd created with my own hands. Not to prove a point but to take my place, not in the spotlight but in my own skin. I stayed near the back after the collection reveal. Inez had warned me that applause fades quickly, but the attention that follows it sticks to you like a second skin. She wasn't wrong. People I didn't know wanted to talk. Buyers, designers, journalists. One woman from a heritage brand told me the Dovegri trench felt like a memory someone finally put into fabric. That stayed with me. Not just the compliment, but how it was said. With softness, with recognition. I caught glimpses of Vanessa, between conversations. She hadn't moved much from her spot, but her posture was different now. Rigid, her shoulders weren't floating anymore. They were squared in confusion. That edge she carried everywhere, the one that always made her look untouchable, had started to unravel. She'd stopped talking, which, for Vanessa, said everything at one point. Someone walked up to her with a camera. A fashion blogger, mid-20s, excited. "You've been wearing Dovegri for months, right? What's your favorite thing about Elise's work?" There was a pause, just a breath too long. And then came the stammer. The kind people tried to cover with a laugh. Oh, I didn't realize she was Dovagri. We've never really talked about it, actually. I watched her say it. That little smile she gave the camera, the one that didn't quite meet her eyes. She was unraveling, faster than the hem of a rushed knockoff, because it hit her then, all at once. That, every brunch, every photo, every compliment she'd directed toward a nameless visionary brand had been aimed squarely at the woman she used to call Scrappy. She'd spent a year parading my name like it was a trophy, not knowing she'd been holding a mirror. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. Someone else chimed in next to her, a boutique buyer from upstate. I love your coat, Elise's work is so layered. That lining. Stunning. You picked a good one. Vanessa nodded slowly. Her mouth moved, but no words came out. Eventually, she drifted toward the exit. No goodbyes, no statements, just the soft retreat of someone who finally realized the room had shifted, and not in her favor. I didn't follow. I didn't watch her leave. Instead, I stood where I was, holding a glass of water, listening to two stylists debate whether the neckline on the third gown in the collection had been a reference to a 1940s silhouette. They asked me, gently, what inspired it. I thought about telling them the truth. About the kitchen table where I'd stitched the first version. About the night Vanessa told a group of strangers I looked like I'd glued scraps together. About the family brunch where she turned my work into a punchline and no one stopped her. But I didn't. I just said, restraint, because that was the real thread, the thing they couldn't see, the thing Vanessa could never fake, the difference between wearing something and embodying it. She never understood that elegance wasn't about luxury, it was about grace under pressure, stillness in the face of dismissal, power that didn't need a mic. And now, the same crowd that used to lean toward her, had leaned away. They weren't cruel. They just sensed what the room knew before she did, that the story had moved on, and she wasn't the center anymore. She was just part of the background, a brief chapter in someone else's legacy. Mine. And I hadn't raised my voice to take it. I'd just stayed long enough to outgrow the space she tried to box me into. By the end of the night, someone handed me a folder with media requests, interview offers, retail interest. I tucked it under my arm and found Inez by the glass doors. She didn't say anything, just gave me a long look and a nod, and in the quiet after the noise, all I could think was how strange it is that after years of being invisible in rooms like this, tonight, the silence finally belonged to someone else. The next morning was quiet, no grand gestures, no headlines with my face, just light cutting across my kitchen table, the same way it always had, a teacup beside my sketchbook. My hands still, my breath slow, but something was different. Not louder, just more certain. For years, I had been stitching from a place of silence, trying to make sense of what I couldn't say out loud, holding my tongue while my work whispered for me. But now, it didn't have to whisper anymore, because the people who used to talk over me were quiet, and not out of guilt, out of recognition. That kind of silence, the kind that follows a reckoning. It doesn't need to be filled, it just needs to be understood. I didn't attend the post-gala press events. I let Theo handle the interviews. Inez dealt with the retailers. My name was out there now, officially tied to Dovigri, but I didn't need to chase it. I'd spent too long chasing things that never cared whether I caught them. Instead, I went to see Inez. She was already expecting me. She didn't ask how the night went. She didn't need to. She just moved a stack of pattern books aside and nodded toward the table where we used to sit, night after night, sketching with graphite-stained fingers and hearts too full for words. Pulled a box from my bag, wrapped in cotton. Inside, a single jacket, pale ivory, mid-length, hand-stitched, structured, but soft, the kind of garment that didn't need a spotlight. But what made it different was inside the lining. I'd stitched a small tag, where only the wearer would ever find it. It read, "For the one who saw me first." Inez ran her thumb across the hem but didn't say anything. She just nodded once. Like something had landed where it was always meant to. That afternoon, I walked through the district alone, past the boutiques, past the cafes where women flipped through catalogs, not realizing half the pieces in them had passed through my hands. I didn't feel powerful. I felt still. And stillness, I was learning, was its own kind of strength. I thought about Vanessa, not with bitterness, but with clarity. She hadn't ruined me. She'd revealed me, because sometimes the people who try to bury you are the very ones who dig the ground where your roots grow deepest, and when you rise, you don't owe them a thing. Not a speech, not a confrontation, not even acknowledgement, just your absence from the place they thought you'd stay. My success wasn't a scream, it was a seam. Clean, quiet, unrushed, and somewhere in that seam was a name. Mine. Not on a billboard, but woven, finally, into something that couldn't be mocked, something that fit, not just the body, but the woman I had become.